Mhm. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to November 9th, Revolution Gathering. Sorry I'm a few minutes late, but here we are live. Oh, I don't know. This past week has felt like a year almost. It's been really crazy. Oh, what a time to be alive. Here, I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger for me so I can see more of you there. All right, there we go. Well, good morning. Oh man, what a time to be alive. It's funny as I started this, as I was tuning up the YouTube live channel, somebody was like, I had talked last uh, this month about how we had gotten more people doing downloads, and someone was like, "What was the beginning of this year? Like 5 downloads?" The cruelty of people, especially online, is it's. I mean, it's not shocking, but it's still wild that people are always like to I don't know. We just find a lot of people just find a lot of I don't know. I guess it's just easy to be a keyboard warrior. I'm not going to let it get to me. I'm just tired and I've had caffeine to wake me up. But it's always fun to see some crap comments when you first open up the computer. Oh, yay! The trolls are winning. Um, yeah, I mean, how do you start with what's going on in this world right now? I mean, I would love to say that I would love to be just talking to you all about philosophy, theology, all my favorite little things there, and even biblical scholarship. But I think we're in a place right now in history that's just unprecedented, more unprecedented stuff and unpresidential. So we got a lot to cover today. You know, I've been a bit depressed. I've been down. Um, I think seeing everything in the world going on is just overwhelming, and the conversations aren't easy to have with a lot of folks. That's why we always talk about disagreeing well or arguing well or whatever, trying to communicate with each other, but it really can be a struggle. Um, so as I dive into this talk, I was thinking about this quote from a song from the National, and I've used it before. I've talked about it before, probably not in a very long time though, because I think this song came out in like 2007 or something. But the quote from the song is, "God loves everybody. Don't remind me." And uh, I like that sense, like, and if you've listened to the National, it's all very like he's like very one tone. I mean, when you see him live, he's a little bit more alive, but they're like, "God loves everybody, don't remind me." And I feel like that's how a lot of us in the current climate in the United States. I mean, there's horrible things happening all over the world. But the current climate in the United States is we don't want to be reminded of who our neighbor is, uh, who our enemy is, and who we're supposed to love. That's just not where we want to be right now because it's very uncomfortable. And so the talk I've prepared today is going to kind of cover some of that ground as well as what's happening. Um, for me, I think if a lot of you all remember 10 months ago, I was very honest about how I felt about uh, the Biden presidency and their support for Israel and what was happening in Gaza. And I know that a lot of people felt like my timing was off and told me that and made it clear. Uh, but I'm always, I'm trying to not have this like binary type of thinking where I'm like, Democrats good, Republicans bad. I don't want to live in that world. And I feel like we've always got to speak truth to power. And I think that's one of the interesting aspects of following the faith of Christianity is that's what we're called to do. Um, and our politicians know that, so obviously they try to get like, well, we've got we've got a corner on it. So if you follow us, you'll follow your Jesus, your God. We know what it's all about, and that's just not true. And it seems to be a continuous test on all of us to see like where do our loyalties lie. Do we care more about ourselves? Do we care more about others? Do we care more about our politicians? What does this faith add to us? And a few weeks ago we talked about the importance of what was it? um, the importance of sorry, my brain is when I drink caffeine, it gets me going, but it also gets my brain. Oh, the legacy of Christ was the love of others, the loving of others. That's what Jesus really brought to the table of loving others. And so, how do we do that? And how do we do that well? Um, and the reason I want to make this clear is because yes, I am going to talk about our current administration and our president. I don't want you to think that, because I do have a Democratic background, I don't really consider myself a member of either party anymore. But I don't want people to think that I'm just like, oh, I'm just here to, crap on the politicians of the side that I don't like. That's not what today is about at all. Matter of fact, it's not even the party as much as it is a person and what's happening in today. And it has to be talked about. If we're going to talk about social justice, if we're going to talk about justice, if we're going to talk about loving others and loving our neighbors and all these things, it has to be talked about. So that's what we're talking about today. So if you're easily triggered by this stuff, take a breath, take a deep breath. Maybe just skip this one. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe turn your keyboard off or make sure your caps aren't all on. But here we go, folks. We're gonna jump into this today. So for me, the president right now, our current president, is using the most vulnerable Americans to make a political point to his to the other side, to the Democrats, to his opposing party. And he seems to confuse the politicians with the people sometimes, and I find that unhealthy and unhinged as well. But the president seems to be using the most vulnerable Americans to try to use for political points, and I find it to be very dangerous. I think this should be very obvious to both sides, and my hope is that people who supported this president or still somehow support this administration will speak truth to when things don't line up. I always try to do that with politicians that might be more leaning towards my political views. When I see them treating people as political pawns, uh, trying to speak up loudly, even if it's unpopular, because I think it's vitally important that we always speak truth to power. And it may even be more important that we speak truth to power when it's someone who's closer to our ideals in life, our own convictions. I think that makes a bigger impact is when we speak truth to those that people would think, oh, I thought, it's like, no, how are we going to, how are we ever going to convince anyone that, to get out of that binary thinking if we're continuously supporting binary thinking and just like, well, this one side is all good and this one side is all bad. And if you've lived life very long, you know that that's just not true. Um, I think to be silent on this would be a betrayal to myself and everything I've learned about grace and faith in my life. But to me, I'm really want to try to make this clear that to me, this isn't about party politics. This is a call for justice and for faith, people of conviction, people who feel justice, people who feel called to their brothers and sisters and humans. I have, you know, where I stand on a lot of these issues, but today, this I think is important. So I think today we have to ask ourselves, one of the questions is, who is my neighbor? Now we've done this past few weeks, past few months, we've talked about who's my neighbor and looked at that, but we're going to look at it in a little bit of a different way here in a second. But obviously, what I'm talking about is that we have a leader of this country who's using poor people, taking away SNAP benefits and their benefits to eat and be able to have food, and using it as a game piece. And people are going to go hungry. Families are going to go hungry. People I know in my community are going to go hungry. People I know who are sick and still work are going to not be able to have enough food to eat and might not be able to make the rent because of how they're going to have to balance their budgets. Um, Kids I work with and their families after school are going to be affected by this. And it's, Thanksgiving just adds insult to injury. Just the holidays coming up just adds insult to injury to that. But the fact is that this has to be talked about, because these are the kind of the essence of humanity is what we do for the least of these. And who is my neighbor? These are the essence of Christianity and community and what it is to be a United States, like we the people kind of idea. You know what I mean? Like it's about the people. And we seem to forget that. We think that it's just we the us and our group. But this is about the people and how we do that. So one of the things I was looking at is in Luke 10:36. And we've gone through the whole, you know, the whole thing of the not we did the parable of the Good Samaritan. We've done that whole thing. I talked about it a few weeks ago. You can go back and listen to it if you're interested. But what really important to me is with how it ends, how the parable of the Good Samaritan ends. If you're not familiar with it, you can go in and check it out in the Bible. It's in Luke 10, starting at 25. But I just wanted to read the very end of it. And it says here in Luke 10:36, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And he's asking this of the man who asked him a question of who his neighbor was. He goes, so which one of these? And we remember from the story, you had two people who passed this man who had been robbed and beat up and was bloody on the side of the street. And then the one man who was kind of known as his enemy, or at least someone who he would not care very much about, stopped and helped him. And so he goes, which of these three do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And he said, the one who showed him mercy. And this is what Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. So this idea of, what I think about is interesting about this is, who's my neighbor? And Jesus gives this question, but he's also showing us who's not our neighbor. He's also saying, like, a person who doesn't help you in a time of need, a person who passes by you when you're suffering and isn't worried about your well-being isn't your neighbor. It's the person who stops, no matter what their religion is, no matter their background is, no matter what they believe or don't believe. That is your neighbor. Those who help you are your neighbor. So it's not even at this point us saying, how do I love my neighbors as myself? How do you be a neighbor who loves? Who is my neighbor? So if we really want to be the neighbors who love, who's acting as a true neighbor, we will show mercy and go and do likewise, and encourage others to do likewise. And I see so much on Facebook, The interesting thing about Facebook is we have, I have my Jay Baker Facebook, and then we have the Revolution Church Facebook. And the algorithm doesn't seem to understand that all churches aren't conservative. And so I've been getting all these bots, and they're all like really conservative bots, and they're all talking about SNAP benefits, and they almost all say the same thing, and they all are like AI generated, and it's really disturbing. I've reported a lot, but I really don't know what to do at this point. But a lot of it is saying like people need to start working and stop depending on my tax money and all this stuff. And it's all this like, oh, SNAP people need to, it's just tearing down the least of these. It's a complete lack of sympathy, empathy, or mercy. All three of those are just completely thrown out the door. And I feel like it's like someone, whoever is making these bots is definitely like, we got to keep these people divided. We've got to get these people really angry at the poor, and especially the poor that's not the same way. But the thing is the poor in this country, if you read White Poverty by Reverend Barber, you'll realize that white people are a lot of the poor. And Democrats and Republicans are both on SNAP. I had SNAP provided for me this summer. Um, you know, and the fact that we have this thing of like healthcare being used to be like, well, you choose between being fed or being healthy. I mean, this is like, it reminds me almost of, like a horror movie or something. Like, you want to play a game? Healthcare or food, you decide. And that's so if we want to be acting as neighbors, we show mercy to the other. In Matthew 25, we talked about this too, is as you do unto the least of these, right? We talked about, I did this and this and this, but let's look at that. Let's look at Matthew 25. And again, this is just me looking at the very end of these verses, because I think the point really is there in the meat and really speaks to us. Here we go. Matthew 25, 42 is where I'm going to start. And this is Jesus talking about the judgment of the nations, as they call it. And he said this, he goes, and it's about Jesus coming, but he goes, "For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. Naked and you did not give me clothes. Sick and in prison and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" Then he will answer to them, "Truly, I tell you, just as you did not do to one of the least of these, you did not do to me." And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. This idea that truly I tell you, just as you did not do to one of the least of these. And for so many of these people, that they've made the poor in our country have become the least of these. It might be people with racism. It might be people with sexism. It might be people who are just, don't care about the poor. I don't think that, I think one of the things that's very dangerous that politicians do is when they do a type of scapegoating and they go like, oh, it's all this one group that's really bad. It's all this group of people. These are the bad people. Like you hear our president now, oh, the Democrats are doing it, the far left. And so now all these people are bad. And then, sometimes people on the left will say the same thing. And so there's this scapegoating thing. And we think, well, if we could just get rid of those people, everything would be fine, or it's all those people's faults. And we just shift the blame, why we really have more blame than anything. But we just go, focus over there so you don't see what's happening over here. And so this idea is, I tell you the truth, just as you did not do to the one of the least of these. So the least of these is also going to be like the story of the Samaritan. Someone who is like an enemy, someone who is not thinks differently than you, someone who prays differently than you, someone who may vote differently than you. But these are the least of these. And I can't say it gets more clear than this when it says, I was a stranger, I was thirsty, I was hungry, I was a stranger, I was sick, I was in prison. And the very people that we say, oh, are the most forgotten about in our country and easy to we ignore. It's easy to ignore. It's easy to ignore just because life is so bad, but it's easy to vilify these people and put blame on these people because they have nothing to defend themselves with. And so clearly, these are the people we are called to. If you are a follower of the Christian faith, if you're following Christianity, this is your mandate to be their neighbor, to make sure they're being fed, to make sure they're being clothed, to make sure they're not, when they're sick, they're being taken care of. And we live in the richest country in the world, right now in line with China, but we have this ability to do those things, yet we're being so divided and we're being told that doing these things is the problem. Doing the very things, the very essence, the very basics of the faith of Christianity is the problem. Um, I've talked a lot about this because I'm very passionate about this. I'm very passionate about a lot of things, obviously, but I'm always passionate when people are being treated inhumanely. So, yes, I have issues with ICE. Yes, I have issues with what's happening in Palestine. Yes, I have issues with what Hamas did to Israel. Yes, I have issues with mistreatment of human beings. That's what we're called to do. We're called to support, pick each other up, love each other, support each other, encourage one another, help eat the basics needs. And here we are, so divided, so torn against each other. And so, I talk to a lot of people online because Revolution is an online community and things like that, online, whatever. And a lot of people push back. And it's always wild to watch people push back on this idea of loving the least of these or things like that. And so they'll be like, well, the Bible says. And so I get a lot of people because I've had a lot of people, and it's funny because it's a lot of Christians really pushing back on me very hardly, really hard. Well, the Bible says this and that. They want to use the Bible to tell you that, Jay, you're wrong. You know, Donald Trump should be, our president should be punishing these people because they're not working and so they don't deserve to eat, which is just not true if you understand how SNAP and works in this country. Um, and it's actually not very easy to get on, and you have to make very, very little to be on it. Honestly, I would challenge any of these people I hate it when they're like, oh, these welfare queens, which is a talking point from 80s Republican conservatives, mostly Ronald Reagan. You know, I wish go live that life. Go live that life for a month and tell me how great it is, and how amazing it is. Or we punish the majority for a few people who may have been able to take advantage of the situation. I don't mind if a few people are taking advantage. I want most people to get help. That's what I want to see. Rather than punishing all the people who are struggling in this world because a few people, that's just going to always be the case. That's just how life works, and that's how humanity works. But a lot of people were kept up bringing Second Thessalonians is being used to justify people going hungry. Paul, the Apostle Paul. And the Bible says people have to work for and so there's a problem with using Second Thessalonians. One is, using the Apostle Paul to argue with one of Jesus's biggest, most repeated messages about loving the least of these, loving the poor, doing good to those who persecute. That to use Paul to against Jesus, but we do that because we want to be able to justify our own prejudice. We want to justify our own sin. And remember, sin in the Tillich's concept is separation. So we want to be able to justify the separation rather than the reunion with these people. So we go, well, like, look at Paul, you know. So I'm going to give you a few things about Second Thessalonians being used to justify people going hungry. I mean, we can even jump over to it if you want. I'll at least give you the verses if I can find it. Let me see. Where are you, Thessalonians? This is when you're trying to find something and your dyslexia really kicks in. Yeah, First Thessalonians, not First Thessalonians. They're using Second Thessalonians. There is one thing in First Thessalonians where you could kind of go like, maybe it's that, but in Second Thessalonians is what they're really focusing on. And I believe it's in Second Thessalonians 3 that they're using in 6 about idleness, and this is the one that they're using against the people. And it says, now we command you, beloved, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, to keep away from believers who are living idleness and not according to the tradition that they received from us. Okay, so listen to that idleness. You could explain that in a few different ways. For you yourself know you ought to imitate us. We were not idle when we were with you, and we did not eat anyone's bread without paying for it. But with toil and labor, we worked night and day so that we might not burden any of you. This was not because we do not have that right, but in order to give you an example to imitate. For even when we were with you, we gave you this command: anyone unwilling to work should not eat, for we hear that. All right, so seems pretty clear. You know, let's not let any. But let's look at this. Let's look at Second Thessalonians, deconstruct it. There's about 3 issues with this Second Thessalonians verse. The first one is it's considered a clumsy rewrite of Paul's letter. That it's Second Thessalonians is not written by the Apostle Paul. In First Thessalonians, there's a point where he talks about encouraging, just working with one another, and in First Thessalonians is working so that you don't have to depend on other communities. That's very clear in First Thessalonians. Like, you don't want to have to depend on other Christian communities, other bodies, because that's who he's talking to, a church in Thessalonica, the Thessalonians. And he's saying, I don't want you to depend on them to do that. But in the second one, it seems to really hammer the point out. First point it's a rewrite. It's not written by the Apostle Paul. It's about leaders. It's about leaders taking advantage of community. When he says Christians who expected to return, so you've got this idea where he's saying other leaders. When you see this and this is why it's a clumsy rewriting, is you see it in Galatians where he talks about, these guys, these other Christians came in and did this and did that, but he's often talking about leaders, other apostles or other people claiming to be apostles and things like that, coming into a community and making these demands. He goes, and Paul was a tent maker, very clear about that. So he's saying, don't let, these Christian leaders come in and just live off of you. Don't let them come in and scam you. And who knows that we would just have hundreds and thousands of years of Christians doing that type of thing, or people who call themselves that. Also, a lot of biblical theologians would also say that this was Christians, that Christians who expected the return of Jesus stopped working. They stopped doing things. They stopped, Jesus is coming back, we can stop. That's also a part of it. And like I said before, the original Thessalonians was asking a community to be self-sufficient and not need to depend on other communities, and for everyone to help out and make sure that the community was working together as a whole for everybody to play a part. Now, here's the other big part is there was no capitalism at the time. They probably weren't dealing with the unfair wages and minimum wage not being enough to pay rent and to pay bills and to do all these type of things. It's a completely different concept and idea of how people live. It's talking to a Christian community of believers who are trying to support each other and live with each other and live in community. It's not talking about a country. It's not talking about a government. Um, it's not talking about the disabled. It's not talking about the sick. It's not talking about children. It's not talking about the elderly. These are things that aren't being confronted here. So you take this pseudo Paulinian letter that's not Paul, that's considered a messy rewrite by most scholars, even not even some scholars just think it's just a forgery altogether, and use this to defend people going hungry. And I think one, Paul would be horrified by that. I don't think Jesus would be excited about that. And for me, it's just not. I mean, I'm already upset that there's so much fake Paul or pseudo Paul in the Bible. It's always an issue, especially like with the pastoral epistles, as you guys know, where it's just almost anti-Paul. It's like trying to pretending to be Paul to undo everything Paul has said in the past. So you have a big problem and a big issue with this pseudo thing. But also, as a lot of scholars say, is often reading the Bible is making you have to negotiate with the word. You're negotiating with that. And I've always said that love is the trump card. How we love our neighbors, being a good neighbor is always vitally important. But it's wild to me that people say, well, this Second Thessalonians, where Paul's talking to this community, and he's showing that he was the example of he worked hard, that is a reason for people not to have food benefits and for people not to be able to feed their families and for people not to have that. Like that's their argument, is that people should go hungry and starve. So, this book is often weaponized. I love this New Revised Standard Bible, and this is the Duke Graduation Edition, and I've bought 3 of them because I just don't, for some reason, I really like it. My last one said "Suspect Device" on it, which is a song from Stiff Little Fingers, and the idea of it being suspect device is that people often weaponize these scriptures and they weaponize the verses to hurt other people. And I would say using the Bible as an excuse for people to go hungry and starve and to be naked and without clothes and not rent and be sick and not be cared for is you could almost say it's demonic or satanic. If you really want to use those words unfortunately were used so often of us growing up about secular music and movies and really things that made no sense. But this is the really thing. It's these are people starving to death. So Paul says, if you don't work, you starve. And that's where so forget about all the things that Jesus said about feeding the poor and the least of these, and forget about the Samaritan, and forget about, Jesus's teachings about the poor and feeding all the people. And but that's their excuse. So at least they have a biblical excuse, I guess you could say, is they're reaching to justify a lack of compassion and love for the other. And so maybe it's our own problem. And that's why we talk about scholarship. And that's why we talk about biblical history and context and knowing these things, because people just take this at what people usually call a 6th grade level. And what they mean by that, it's not to be necessarily demeaning. It's to be when you read something and you have no context and you just take it for that face value. You don't know what the letter, who it's written to, why it was written, really much about the people in the letter. You're just going, oh, and then we turn it into fortune cookie battles. You know what I mean? Where we're just but my fortune says this, because then we take the verses in the scriptures and we really that's a real way to weaponize the Bible. Really, verses in scriptures really help us do that, because then we go 527. So we turn it into a law book, and we try to support our own claims. So we use it just to support our own claims or to find loopholes. I don't think that's what this faith has called us to. I don't think that's what Christ is calling us to, is ways to find loopholes to not help the other. Hope you're doing well, folks, because we're almost done. But no, not really. We're about a little more than halfway there. So I felt like it was important to talk about enemies at this point as well. Because for me, I start to feel like some of these people are my enemies. I start to feel like, wow, if you're wanting to hurt people, you're wanting people to go hungry, you're wanting to take away food out of people's mouths. You're wanting to make it impossible for people to be able to go to the doctors. To me, that seems like a horrible thing to do to somebody. Doesn't seem like it just doesn't add up. I don't know why it's not very clear to see, but you know, we're okay with money on bombs and wars and bailing other countries out and blowing up, boats. And we're able to do all these other things with so, look at the ICE budget, but our own people, it's okay for them to suffer. So it does start to feel that way. But I wanted to talk about the importance of nonviolence in this as well, because I don't want us to get caught up with this idea of this binary thinking when we're disagreeing with people or we're arguing with people and we're trying to help them understand things. And I've had some really drag out hard conversations with friends of mine and people I know, like really tough conversations this past week. I mean, it's been exhausting and going back and forth. And I'm really happy to say that some people have come around that who I've had these tough conversations with, these arguing well, and it was arguing. Some of these people are going like, okay, all right, I see your point, because I looked into it. I said, well, look at this and look at this, and let's talk about this. And they saw it, and I was just as shocked as you were to be like, what? You agree with me? But I'm going to read from Martin Luther King Jr. from one of his sermons about loving your enemies. We've done that one here before at Revolution Gathering, and I just want to remind you what he said, because he always said enemies aren't. The misinformation is our enemy, not the people. But listen to this. Certainly, one can never forget. This is Martin Luther King Jr. If that means erasing it totally from their mind, so you can't have a hard time forgetting when you've been hurt or betrayed or someone's done something bad to you. But when we forgive, and this is a tough one, folks, this is a really hard one. But when we forgive, we forget in the sense that evil deed is no longer a mental block impeding a new relationship. You hear that? It's no longer a mental block when we forgive. And that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping we're called to restoration with these people, called to have these tough conversations and get to a point where we really do respect humanity, not just the humanity of the least of these, but even the humanity of those who don't see it, who we want to help see it. But when we forgive, we forget, not in the sense that evil deeds no longer is a mental block. No, yeah. In the sense that an evil deed is no longer a mental block in the new relationship. Likewise, we can never say, I will forgive you, but I won't have anything further to do with you. Now, I know people aren't going to like this one because I know a lot of people who feel that way. And there is a time where you got to take some time away. And I think anybody who's been in a bad relationship or had a family member, but it says, likewise, we can never say, I will forgive you, but I won't have anything further to do with you. Forgiveness means reconciliation. Again, we look at what Tillich also said, and Dr. King was a big fan of Tillich, is grace is reconciliation, sin is separation. So likewise, we can never say, I will never have anything to do with you, but I won't. Likewise, we can never say, I will forgive you, but I won't have anything further to do with you. Forgiveness means reconciliation, a coming together. Without this, no man can love his enemies. This is a big one, right? So when we talk about dying to our flesh and picking up our cross and doing these things, this is what it has more to do with. I was sold most of my life in my Assemblies of God youth is that it was just all about sex and rated R movies and cigarettes and alcohol, and the most important things just seemed to be kind of like second thought. They weren't really worried if I was helping the least of these or feeding the least. Oh, well, we have a shelter, so we're just going to focus on tearing you apart for these little things. Um, Without this, no man can love his enemies. The degree with we are able to forgive determines the degree to which we are able to love our enemies. So as we've talked about before, it's progress, not perfection. But my hope is that reconciliation happens through this. that we're not trying to destroy the people who disagree with us, but we are looking for them to understand and to see why the least of these are valuable, important. But we're also seeing that hopefully there'll be reconciliation with these folks and continued conversations. And that's the tough, but I wanted to put that in there because it's just so easy for us to sit here and go like, these people are bad, they're horrible, we gotta get rid of them and forget about them. And that's the difference between just living normal life and then saying, well, I want to follow Christianity. I want to follow Jesus. I want to follow this example. Is that that's not how it's done. Because if we do that, then we're not really much different than anybody else. So there's the crux of the situation, the kind of fly in the ointment, the oh, what? And he also says, Dr. King also says, returning hate for hate, listen to this, returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding a deeper darkness to the night already devoted, the darkness to the already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Hate multiplies hate. Violence multiplies violence. And toughness multiplies toughness. And a descending spiral of destruction. So when Jesus says, love your enemies, he is setting forth a profound and ultimate, inescapable call. Have we not come to such an impasse in this modern world that we must love our enemies or else? The chain reaction of evil, hate begets hate, wars produce more wars, must be broken, or we shall be plunged into the darkness abyss of annihilation. So not only are we called to defend the least of these and stand for the least of these, but hopefully restore those who persecute the least of these or use them as, pieces of a game. Just, use them as pawns. The hope is reconciliation with those who are working against us. Yeah, I wasn't really comfortable with that one either. I'd rather just be like, let's just win this thing and everybody be taken care of. At the same point, again, I feel like we have to speak truth to power, because what's happening, I mean, to see a sitting president literally appeal to courts so he doesn't have to feed the least of these, to me, is cruel and unusual. I've never seen it in my lifetime. No one has ever done this before. And I don't understand it. And I don't understand the facts, the fact that some people support this and stand with this and defend this type of behavior. Um, and see it in such a and like this with such tunnel vision, with just this, like, they don't see all the money going out everywhere and then go, well, we just can't have the money spent, and going like, well, then if what, but why wouldn't you speak out when we were sending bombs over here, or when we're doing this type of thing, or we're bailing out these people, or we're doing that, these are your brothers and sisters, these are your countrymen, these are the people of the United States, this is we the people, what's going on? And when you see these people who are saying, well, using the scriptures to try to deny the hungry food, you go like, you wonder if that's the moment where they sit down with Jesus and it goes, and you use the verses and you use the scriptures to deny. When I was hungry, you used the scriptures against me. I mean, it's something to think about, Again, I believe our current administration is using people to make a point and to hurt their opponents. Unfortunately, politicians and pastors and denominations and religious people often fall into this behavior. I want to read you something that Paul Tillich wrote. I think this makes it really hard for Brian, who has to make the clips when I'm reading these long sentences. I apologize in advance, Brian. Um, but I want to read to you what Paul Tillich, philosopher, theologian, in this book right here. So this book is fantastic. If you want a little bit an easier Tillich book to read, this is another good one. Some of his books are very tough to read, very thick and philosophical. He says here, he goes, to understand this, we must ask about the rise of moral consciousness in past history and today. Every day, for with each unique human being, moral consciousness develops anew. Its source is this encounter. Its source is this encounter of a person with a person. An encounter in which each person constitutes an absolute limit for the other. Each person, in being a person, makes the demands not to be used as means. So each person as a human being doesn't want to be used as means to an end, you know. And right now they're saying, oh, all these people are getting, I mean, they say horrible racist things about people on Snap as though it's just one race of people or just one group of people. And it's really horrific and really sad and really pathetic to see hate used in such a way. And what I feel like this current administration is doing with this particular situation is using people's to me as means to an end, means to win an argument, means to try to make themselves look better. We can run ahead in the world in knowing and acting in every direction, in every dimension. We can make use of all kinds of things in order to do this. But suddenly we encounter a person, a being who says without words, simply by being a person, just to this point and not beyond, acknowledge me as a person. You cannot use me as means. See me as a person. See me as humanity. Don't use me as a means. Don't use me to get your to further your political agenda or further your religious agenda or your theological agenda, or any agenda. Nobody wants to be used as means. And we say the same thing to them. Don't use me as means. You see, when we're here's the reconciliation kind of thing. Neither one of us wants to be used as means. Both of us demand acknowledgement as persons. And we're not doing that right now very well in the United States or around the world. My demand on them is as unconditional as their demand on me. That which is only a thing, predominantly a thing, can be used. But if one uses a person, one abuses not only them, but also oneself. Do you hear this? So this is a good thing to remember, especially in reconciliation and loving our enemies and things like this, is not realizing that they're not just using another person, they're also using themselves. So Tillich goes on to say, and it is this that creates the unconditional character of the moral imperative. If I use a person as a thing, I myself lose my dignity as a person. I'm going to say that again, because this is the loss of dignity. This is how we lose dignity to Paul Tillich. Now, Paul Tillich was not just a philosopher. He was also a theologian and a believer, and probably wrote one of the best talks on grace I've ever read in my life. He goes, if I use a person as a thing, I myself lose my dignity as a person. And right now, people on Snap, the least of us, people in poverty, are being used as a thing. And so it's hard for us to have any dignity, and for me to see any dignity in people who do this, because they're losing their dignity as people. And when we do this to each other, even when we do it and we feel like we're in the right and we're going to do it back to the right because they're doing it to us, or we're going to do it to this president because he's doing it, then we can also fall right into that trap and lose our own dignity. And that's what we don't want to do. Okay, that's where love comes in. It's progress, not perfection, but that's where the real struggle comes in. That's the dying to flesh. That's taking up the cross. That's trying to move forward in a graceful way, showing grace. That's the grace that's anarchy, man. That's it. This, of course, is a description of the norm, the vitality in which we can experience. In reality, it has always been trespassed, broken, violated, and we violate it and continually hear it in the birthplace of the unconditional character of the moral imperative. Now, I ask, why is this imperative unconditionally valid? The answer is because it is our own true or essential being that confronts us in the moral command, demanding something from us in our own actual being with all its problems and distortions. If we act against this command from our true being, we violate ourselves. If the moral command, whatever its content is, comes from any other source than our true being, it is imposed on us from outside. If it comes from authority of any kind, it is not an unconditional command for us. Then we and must then we must then we just then we can and must resist it because it denies our own dignity as a person. So when we see people's dignity being torn apart by politicians or by people of faith or by anyone or influencers or anything like that, when we see that and it's coming in, we have to resist it. We must resist it. It doesn't matter if it's your favorite politician or your favorite speaker or your favorite musician or actor or influencer or family member. If it's coming in and it's causing you to lose dignity of or not see the dignities of others and it's commanding you to do that, we must resist it because it denies our own dignity as a human people. Don't lose your dignity because someone other is giving you a license to do that. Religious ethics say that moral command is a divine command and that expresses the will of God. The will of God is symbolic, in a symbolic way of speaking, and we must interpret it in order to deprive it of connotations or arbitrariness on the part of heavenly tyrants. God will give it given to us the way we are created, which means it is given through our true nature and essential being. It is not something arbitrary that falls from heaven. It is the structure of our true being that speaks to us in the moral command. You hear that? It speaks to us already. It's in our heart, it's in our moral command. If we are united with our essential being, there would be no command. We would be what we should be and do what we should do. Therefore, we would be no ought to be, no command, thou shalt only simple being. However, this is not the case. We are separated from our true and essential being, and therefore it stands against us. It commands us and commands unconditionally. Someone may ask, why should I not violate myself by disobeying what my true being demands of me? Why should I not throw away my dignity as a person, even destroy myself as a person? Now we could go on. This is great, but you know what Tillich is trying to say here is pretty simple. Like when we destroy others' dignity, we're destroying our own dignity as human beings. And you could say that this is a very deeper look at loving your enemy and loving your neighbor as yourself. And that's why when Jesus tells the story of the Samaritan and the lawyer asks, well, you know, when Jesus asks him, well, what three of these folks did you think were acting as a neighbor? And he goes, the one who helped him. And he goes, yes, go do likewise. You know, he said, keep your dignity by giving others dignity. And so when we sit there, and I feel like this is something that we all know instinctively, when we see people tearing other people's dignities away, and oh, you're not good enough. Oh, you're not deserving of life. You're not deserving of the breath of life or the food, or you're not deserving of help or support. You know, no one's going to give you a break. We've lost our humanity because I think all of us, given that situation, would beg for support, beg for help, would want someone to show us grace, would want someone to show us forgiveness, would want someone to help us in the time of need. And that would feel like humanity, but we've lost it. We've lost it because of this idea of capitalism and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. You know, um, I'll tell you what, folks, things like Snap are not people living life free and living the good life. It's really hard to qualify. It's really hard to be a part of that. And these people are suffering. And yes, there may be a few people taking advantage, but that is no reason to strip the dignity and humanity from other people's their hope and their needs. So that's the talk today. This is what's going on in the world. We're in a really bad place, and I really hope that folks will speak up and speak loudly and reclaim their human dignity, reclaim the dignity of loving others and loving the least of these, and eventually being restored to those that we disagree with. And by helping them learn to help them claim, we want them to reclaim their dignity as well. And that's what we're trying to do. And it's not easy. It's progress. It's not perfection. It's a slow road, but that's where we're at. So thanks everybody today for tuning in. That's where my heart is. I hope this spoke to you. I hope we can be more compassionate and more forgiving and more graceful towards one another, and share our human dignity with others. It would be a good place to start. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps keep us in Facebook. And there's a lot of people who don't need their human dignity and don't want anybody else to have dignity. That Facebook is filled with people like that and speakers like that who have a lot more followers and a lot more listeners than we do. And it feels like we're, trying to move a mountain with a teaspoon sometimes here. So we really could use that. If you like this work and you believe in this work and want to be part of this work, please consider donating to Revolution. You can go to revolutionchurch.com. We have PayPal and Venmo, and they both give you a tax deductible donation. So that's available. It's the end of year. So a lot of people are doing their end of year tax deductible donations. We would be grateful if we were on that list. We cannot do this work without you. Like I said, I was working 4 jobs this summer and still Snap sent me 2 EBT cards because of my kids, because they know from taxes where I'm at and what I make, and they know from my health care. And that's the other thing is healthcare. Like I might not even have healthcare this year. Like it's this real scary place to be because I might not be able to afford it. Looks not looking great. And that's where we're at. It's a tough time to be alive. It's a tough time to try to raise money too, because we're all kind of going through it, and it's a struggle for all of us. We'd much rather have you than your money. And ways you can help is by following, get a YouTube account, follow us, like and subscribe, share this stuff with your friends and neighbors, let people know what we're doing, share our talks and content on Instagram and Facebook, and get in and jump in on the conversation. And we can help each other argue well and remind each other to show more grace and forgiveness, and remind each other the importance of that, because sometimes I can use it. And sometimes on Facebook, I get a little bit too harsh and start losing my own dignity as a human being. So there's all sorts of stuff we can do and you can do to help support this work, but we want to continue this work and fight for the least of these and see that happen, and also be able to continue to talk about the context and the importance of understanding the Bible and the Word, so we don't weaponize it, so we don't use it against the least of these, so it doesn't become this complete contradiction of just destroying people's lives, so we don't fall into this binary thinking of good and bad and scapegoating one another, which is such an easy thing to do. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we want to help with that work. So please consider doing that and helping Revolution at revolutionchurch.com. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next week, if not before then. If you turn on the notifications, sometimes we throw up some stuff, extra stuff here on our YouTube channel during the week, and it will let you know when that happens. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. That is another way you can help us and get the word out there. So thanks so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.